This week on the podcast, well, blow me sideways, we've got a general election. So we ask, how can you prepare your business for the ups and downs to come? Welcome to the Profit Cash Growth Podcast. This is the podcast for 6 and 7 figure business owners who are looking to grow a financially successful business. My co-host, Claire Hancock, is a finance director, chartered accountant and entrepreneur. And every week, I'll be exploring guidance and frameworks designed to help you increase your profits, improve your cash flow and grow your business. Oh, we're back.
We had a wonderful week in Crete, didn't we?
I just realised that nobody will realise we've been away because we pre-recorded last week's episode shamelessly.
I don't think there's anything wrong with doing a bit of batch recording sometimes every now and again.
Business preparation and all the rest of that.
Exactly, so we could enjoy our few days in the sunshine.
So, it was a week. We had a good week, didn't we? We went to Chania.
Chania in
For everyone
Crete.
else, it's spelled Chania, but they don't like to say the C, so...
And it was magnificent. It rained a little bit on the first day, but other than that, it was like high 20s, glorious sunshine, and probably some of the best food and wine we have had in a long time.
Foodie's place, absolute foodie's place. Not a single meal was not absolutely exceptional, was it? And great wine as well.
When we were there, you described it as the Henley-on-Thames of Crete, didn't you?
It's a bit like that, yeah, all around the harbour, definitely. So I highly recommend that as your little retreat from your business. It's an easy one. 3.5 hour, 3:45 flight.
Yep.
To be honest with you, probably a little bit too long for me. I don't like anything over a 2-hour flight now. You would never believe that. You'd never believe that I spent 10 years of my life doing flight after flight after flight. Some weeks I would do 9 flights in a week.
Yeah, it was a lot, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Now I can't even stomach a 3.5 hour flight. Give me anything less than 2 and I'm happy. So.
And we have come back to a bumper week of news, haven't we? This is the news that basically the whole of the UK has been wildly anticipating. And
The rain?
No, not the rain.
Okay.
We were worried that it was going to be dragged out till Christmas time, but no, Rishi Sunak has called a general election.
Well, don't steal the thunder. Let's see what this week's news story of the week is. So yes, surprise, surprise, to the background music of Things Can Only Get Better, our beloved Prime Minister has called a general election, to most people's surprise, I think. I think we're expecting November, weren't we?
Well, it was widely touted, but that's just because statistically it's quite unusual for a general election to be called in the summer. This is particularly interesting because it's going to be bang in the middle of the Euros, isn't it?
What, you think nobody's going to give a damn?
Yeah, I wonder how many people are going to give a damn, actually. How many people are going to be tuning in to some of the election campaigns? How many people will just be enjoying the Euros, watching the football?
What? I've just had a thought, and I've not had this thought yet about strategically, because there's been lots of talk about, strategically why has Rishi made this decision, and there's been talks about whether he feels like things are going to get a lot worse, and that inflation data that came out that day, 2.3% was the driving factor. But you know what? I reckon there's a higher swing of Labour voters that are football fans that wouldn't turn up at the polls necessarily, or wouldn't pay attention to the campaigning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure how that would swing, but yeah, I would say that.
I haven't thought about that.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm sure it's not the driving factor. But
yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll have
it's an interesting one, isn't it?
It's
going to certainly distract the larger Labour demographic, maybe.
It is a big distraction, that's for sure. And
I feel like most Conservatives I know are into cricket and rugby and I don't know.
Yeah, but they still like football. I mean, I love watching football and I'll be watching it all, but I will still also be tuning into all the political highlights.
But, if you're running your business and you've got people to deal with, often they're more distracted, aren't they? To sit there and just watch TV.
There is general consensus amongst people who sit quite central. I'm quite central. I've always voted Tory, but I would say I'm very central. And whilst I do believe that, people should, a little bit of what Margaret Thatcher should say, that people should look after themselves and their own family and worry about making their own lives better rather than giving money to other people. I do sit in the centre, and I also do see that there is hardly any difference between Labour and Tories at the moment. Therefore, will it make any difference whatsoever?
The reality is the hard fact is that if you listen to this podcast and you're anything like us, if you're a business owner and also a property investor, I mean, my goodness, it should be the backbone of Conservative policy, shouldn't it really? But to be honest with you, I don't think they've done either of those areas of favour since they've been in power. And I'm not sure how much worse it'd be with Labour. Like you say, I think they're all very, very central, and I don't think they've got a lot of movement to go. So anyway, let's not talk politics, because it's not a politics podcast, it's the business podcast. And, we can't change what we can't change, which is, the political side of things. But what we can change is how we prepare for what's about to happen. So let's move on to this week's deep dive, which is preparing your business for a general election. So Claire, I've had the joy or misery of running a business for long enough to have been through 2 general elections and to see firsthand what that means for the way that your customers interact with you, what happens with the markets and various other things. So I've got my own views on this, and obviously it's only specific to my own experience in my own industry, which is around housing. But I imagine a lot of businesses sort of follow a similar pattern. And I mean, I guess first of all, as a business owner, Claire, are you happy that they've called this now? Would you have rather they waited? From a purely selfish business owner perspective, what's your view on it?
I think that it's brilliant that we're getting it out the way. The biggest barrier, so much of our economy is fueled by big businesses and outside investment. That's the reality of being in the UK.
Absolutely.
And so much of that is driven by sentiment, particularly in this day and age. If you're a high net worth individual, an investment portfolio, or a big company, you can choose anywhere in the world to go. So why are you going to choose the UK if it's looking uncertain and that things could change? Tax policy could change, interest rates could change, etc., etc. We've got all these layers of uncertainty that come from not only what's happening in the economy, but then layer on the guarantee that there will be a general election soon, and that makes the UK quite unattractive. And that means that there's not money coming in, our economy is stalling, consumer sentiment is down, and therefore I think the sooner they can get this out of the way, the better.
Yeah. I was delighted, to be honest with you, because, as you go into the run up to a general election, or even the warblings of it, things do tend to slow down. People tend to wait. Mm-hmm. They tend to put off their spending, put off their decisions because of that. So I just felt like, from my perspective, the business seemed to turn a corner in January. It was very good, but that slowly started to, the cream has started to come off every month that's gone by, and it's been getting a little more difficult, especially in housing. And I just felt like that was going to continue to go on all the way to November. I was going to write off and lose another year, but actually now I can get it out of the way. And traditionally in my industry, we see a whopping boom post any general election, irrespective of result, because it's just people know where they are and they've got certainty and they can make big spending decisions.
I also think that something like the Euros, whilst it will overall have a boom in our economy, most of that will be in the hospitality sector. So if you're not a business in hospitality, then chances are you will probably find that the Euros will have a slight negative effect on your business, because people are distracted. People take, I know that I will sit down with my team and watch some of the England matches and things like that. So from that perspective, actually the Euros is a distraction as well. Sure. So put the two together, get them both out of the way at the same time, and then hopefully the rest of the year we can have a little bit more certainty, knuckle down and get on with not only growing the economy, but growing our small businesses too.
Yeah. Do you know what else happens straight after a general election is when you've got a new government and they've got 4 or 5 years ahead of them, they can make bold decisions because they can make the big difficult decisions, and then they can let the forgiveness come in over that 4 or 5 years. So actually we might see, there's a lot of uncertainty there because we might see some big changes, but equally if those changes are good and help us, then they could, help push through things that have got a bit stagnant of late.
Yeah. The only thing that's in the back of my mind, which is a bit of a concern, is if we end up with a hung parliament. And having spoken to quite a lot of people, actually, because I'm dead into politics. It's the number one thing that I'm speaking to everybody about at the moment is saying, who are you going to vote for? And a large amount of people are saying reform. But actually, I had a little look at some of what Reform are saying they would do for small businesses and comparing it to what like Tories and Labour would do. And if you look at what Tories have done, because you have to remember they are the government at the moment, they've done not much with corporation tax. In fact, it's gone up. And I would say other than that, pretty much nothing has changed from a small business perspective. They've extended some business rate relief, but that's only for certain categories of business. So really, it's much of a muchness. And when you look at what Labour are saying, they have one bold statement, which was in their 2023 policy. So whether that makes it to the general election or not is yet to be seen. But they are saying that they would completely overhaul the business rates, make it fairer for bricks and mortar high street businesses. So that would be interesting to see whether that does come in, because that would have a direct impact on pretty much every single one of our listeners. But interestingly, Reform, I think, have got the boldest statements around small business. They're saying in the first 100 days, they'll increase the profit threshold on corporation tax to 100,000. They would reduce corporation tax to 20% and then down to 15% within 5 years. They'd abolish the IR35 rules, which makes it difficult to take on contractors and things like that. And they would increase the VAT threshold to 120k.
Interesting. The problem is with these small parties that have got no chance of getting in is that they can say what they want. It's just interesting things. They don't really have to cost them up, do they? And be accountable to anybody. Nobody's debating with them. No one's really challenging them with them. They're so small. And I guess that's the challenge. So you get really interesting tidbits from these. And I agree, they sound wonderful. But the reality is they'll never be able to do them. So they'll never be tested anyway. So
I agree. We're never, well, I say never. I think it's a pretty safe bet that we're not going to see the Reform Party in control of our government. However, if we think back to when Lib Dems and Nick Clegg was the Deputy Prime Minister alongside David Cameron, they did have quite an impact on some of the policies. They had to water them down and compromise and et cetera, et cetera. So actually, I would say that maybe Reform overall wouldn't be that bad for small business.
Well, let's see. I mean, let's just sort of break down. I broke down three things that I think can help business owners. I broke it into three categories. One is consumer changes, one is financial preparedness, and one is stay informed and engaged. So we've touched on a lot of the consumer changes stuff. There's kind of three parts that you've got. Economic uncertainty. So that's all about consumer confidence and spending patterns. So I think I've already touched on personally, and I think you see this a lot across a lot of businesses, that people need to be prepared now that consumer spending is going to be a bit lower. It's going to be a bit more difficult to trade between now and the election result. But anything that they forgo now is probably going to be made up for in a bottleneck effect once the election happens. That's how I see it in my business. So really, a lot of that is then going to tuck into, we won't touch on it now, but it's going to talk about financial preparedness.
Yeah.
And how you could prepare yourself for that, because actually you're probably going to have a bit of a difficult time for the next 6 weeks in many businesses. So you've then got regulatory changes. So that's all about, the potential of new regulations or changes in law. And, you've already talked about a few of the different policies there, Claire. Is there anything that you think, business owners should be particularly concerned about? I mean, let's assume we're on for a Labour government. So from a Labour perspective, what are the big...
Well, look, we're as yet to get into the details of the Labour manifesto and to see exactly what they're saying that they're going to do. But overall, the overriding message that has come out from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is that nothing will change immediately, because they're not going to increase taxes, but also they're not going to cut taxes. They seem to just do nothing but carry on with much of the same, because there's not really any money to spend. So from that perspective, I don't think that we're going to see any significant regulatory changes probably within the first year or so. I think it will take a while for Labour to bed in. And so I don't think that businesses need to be particularly concerned with big policy changes. There could be some individual nuances in specific markets. There's a lot about the leasehold reform and renters' rights and all of that kind of stuff, which Labour have talked about quite a bit and been quite vocal about, and also on workers' rights as well. So there may be some specific industries or very nuanced changes that might have big impacts on certain businesses, but generally as a whole, I don't think we're expecting big regulatory changes.
Yeah, I think you touched on the probably the biggest risk is worker changes. So I think that it's businesses that employ people are the ones that need to have their ear to the ground most.
Even when you get into the detail, as with most politicians, they're great at coming out with a headline and then you look at the detail behind it and actually it's not quite as it appears. So one thing that Labour have been saying is that they'd get rid of 0-hour contracts and the ability for big companies, like there was that P&O scandal, the ability for big companies to basically fire their employees and then rehire them on worse contracts. P&O did it. I think BA did it as well, quite famously. And Labour said they'll get rid of that. But they will get rid of that, except for in certain circumstances. When you look at the list of certain circumstances, basically exactly the same reasons that a business can do it now. So it's this big, bold statement that doesn't deliver on anything.
And the big businesses will always find a way around that. I was very close to BA when they were going through all that, because I worked closely with them. I was a big supplier to them. And, their workers were just so, because they were so unionised, some of the cabin services directors, the people that the head of the cabin crew on a plane were on six figures. It was just wild money, and they just couldn't sustain it. Hence, they weren't competitive against the likes of Emirates and Qatar and people like that came along. And we had a very, lackluster national airline. So things do have to be done, don't they?
I think that might be the biggest concern overall, that I would say expect to see some disruption, whether it's in labour law changes, which I actually think is less likely to see significant labour law changes that affect small businesses. I think we're more likely to see, obviously, labour is completely funded by the unions. So therefore, the power that they have on the policies
totally
could be,
unions, yeah.
And I think actually seeing more disruption as the unions try and negotiate new contracts, new rules, new powers, new laws, etc. I think that could cause quite a bit of disruption across the country from that perspective.
And this is the challenge, isn't it, with Labour? I mean, a lot of the commentary that I've seen is saying, actually, Keir Starmer's not the challenge. And actually, as a leader himself, he's very, like you say, very, very central and I think a fairly safe pair of hands. But actually, it's a case of, can he keep the rest of his backbenchers in line, and some of the more extremist views within the Labour Party, can he keep them in line? But most importantly, can he not be ruled by the unions? And is he strong enough to do that? And that'll be the big question as to where policy and the Labour Party goes with that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that will be interesting to see it play out, but will it impact small businesses? Probably not. So
probably not.
I think overall, we're coming to the conclusion that other than if somebody decides to make a bold statement about a tax policy, I'm not yet seeing much that would change anything for the fate that small businesses play. And something really struck with me, actually, when Rishi did his washout speech outside Parliament the other day, that he made a statement and he said, we are one of, I think it was something along the lines of, he said, we're one of the best places in the world to run a small business. And I'm a big Rishi fan. There aren't many out there, but I am one of his few.
But you were a big George Osborne fan, weren't you?
Yeah, I was a big George Osborne fan too.
You love Big George.
And that even struck quite a chord with me. And I thought, what the hell have you done to help small businesses? Like, I really felt that
think it's
was,
a bit of a...
that made me think,
he talks about his dad's grocery and all this bullshit. He talks about the small business thing, but actually, I don't think they're truly doing that. But anyway, in his "things can only get wetter" speech, I heard that this morning on the news. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's quite clever.
So, final thing on consumer change, about market volatility in terms of investments and financial planning. So, this, we won't go into detail about this, but this is the same thing about businesses holding back their investment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the reality is, as we've just thrashed out, I can't see anything significantly changing in the near future. I think it's going to take several years. If Labour do get our economy kick-started, it won't happen immediately. It's not going to be like they're coming on day one and all of a sudden, we're hooping and wallowing in the streets and popping champagne corks. Like, it's going to take several years to happen. If we see it at all in the first 5 years of them being in power. So from that perspective, I think small businesses have got to carry on like it's business as usual. You've got to just keep going, keep making your decisions. If, when you're deciding about whether to make an investment or whether to do something like expand or buy new equipment, take on a new employee, you need to do a proper financial plan to make sure it's viable. And if it is viable based on the current economic circumstances, then go ahead with it. Do not plan into your analysis that we're going to have this big boom after
you actually
the
can't
election.
Forecast. You actually can't forecast anything, really. I mean, I don't. In terms of people often say you can't plan for what is completely unknown, and there will always be a completely unknown. So if you let trying to plan for these worst things happening hold you back, then you're just never going to move forward. So you do need to just move forward with confidence that when these things happen, you'll just navigate around them. You'll get good advice. You'll work through them, and we always do. That's what a good business owner does. So moving on to sort of my point number 2, financial preparedness. And again, we've talked a bit about this, but there's 2 elements that will get you through any wobbles, if there are any, up to the sort of general election. That's cash flow management and cost management. So talk us a bit about what people should be doing, Claire, around that.
Yeah, so if you are a business that expects to see a slight downturn over the next 6 to 8 weeks, and actually for some businesses that could be a bit more prolonged, because thinking about your business, Simon, for example, estate agency, is dead in the school holidays. So you're going to see this drop because of the Euros and the election, followed by a drop because we're in the school holidays. So you're going to have 3 months of probably a downturn in your sales number.
Well, actually, that's not the case, because in the last general election, Boris Johnson, remember, that was a December election, and interestingly, I would agree with that, because the election result came out and then we would have gone straight into Christmas. But actually, these things significantly upset seasonality in a way that is totally unpredictable. I've been astounded throughout that election and throughout COVID how those things have completely unseated traditional seasonality in my business. So after Boris Johnson was voted, the market went insane right through the Christmas period when it would usually be absolutely dead.
Yeah, however, I think the nuances of what happened prior to that with Brexit also played a part of that, because the market had been stagnant for a really long time. But nonetheless,
same here. It's been stagnant for the last year and a half through interest rates.
If you are a business that has a quiet summertime, then potentially you're going into 3 months quiet period, and that normal 4 to 6 weeks period that you get over the summer is going to be elongated over 3 months. So you've got to then think about the cash impact that that's going to have. If you're not generating any cash in your business really for a period of 3 months, then looking forward into September, October, November, cash could become quite tight. So it's more important than ever that you've got an up-to-date cash flow forecast. And when you're doing that, you need to think about, okay, what would happen if my sales drop by 5%? What would happen if my sales drop by 10%? And understand where that point is that you get into difficulty. For some businesses, you might not get into any difficulty. You might have enough reserves, or the impact on your business might be small enough that it won't impact you. But for a lot of businesses out there, this will have quite a significant impact. So cash flow forecasting and knowing where those different oh my God points are going to be really quite important.
Unless you're an ice cream company, in which case you're probably going to see the opposite. Yeah. What, golden question, how much cash should you hold? It depends.
Well, it does depend. Yes. But I always say the magic number for cash in your bank is 0. The reason being...
Why did Bill Gates, when he launched Microsoft, say that he wanted enough cash in his bank to run his entire business and pay all his staff for a year if no sales came in?
Yeah. Well, when you're starting a business, you have a different approach. But the magic number for cash is 0 at the end of the day. If you can manage your bank balance to always be 0, that would be phenomenal, because it means that you're not wasting a single penny. Every penny that you're bringing in
is optimized.
You're reinvesting back into your business. And that's why I say it should be 0. It shouldn't be 0 because you're scrabbling around for cash all the time and you've got no cash and it's a constant worry. It should be 0 because when you are forecasting that you have cash, you're deciding how to reinvest that in your business, be it with marketing or increasing investments, things like that.
Great. Brilliant. And then the final one really just links into all of it. Stay informed and engaged. I think, even if you're not into politics the rest of the time, I think it's worth during this period actually tapping into what's going on and just keeping abreast of it. You don't have to consume yourself with it and stay focused on your business, but what are the good sources that people can use to kind of monitor development? And, if you really want to get into it, you can engage with your local policymakers, can't you? As a small
absolutely,
business.
Yeah.
I know you've done that yourself, so.
As a small business, you tap into your MP. They are obliged to respond to you if you contact them. They always have drop-in clinics, things like that. So,
make your point.
Make your point, because you just never know how many other people are also making the same point to them or writing the same email that you're writing complaining about something. So never feel like what you say is pointless.
Yeah. And finally, use business associations. So there's a lot out there, NRLA, Federation of Small Businesses, each industry has their federations and they can be a much more powerful voice at policy level, can't they?
Yeah, I think especially after the general election as well, industry bodies that are specific to your industry are much more likely to keep you up to date with any potential changes that will have an impact that's unique to your business. So, like the Road Haulage Association, for example, the RHA, if you own a road haulage company, you're going to want to be interested in things that would directly impact you, or there's the Fleet Alliance and all of these types of things. So whatever your business is, really tap into your industry body and trade unions and things like that, because they will keep you the most up to date, rather than general news is what you'll get if you switch on Sky News or ITV or something.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claire. Well, fantastic. I hope that you found that useful in how to prepare your business for a general election, and do keep a close eye and execute some of the strategies that we've talked about. And let's move on to this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra.
So I'm bringing you the Profit Cash Growth Extra for this week, and I am going to talk to you about something called Wellybox. Now, Wellybox is a piece of software that basically will scour your email inbox for receipts. Now, why I find this really incredibly helpful is because in this day and age, pretty much 99% of all of the invoices or receipts or anything like that we get come via email. And it's always a thing that most business owners have to then either save down those documents. If you get PDFs, you have to save them all down in a folder for your bookkeeper to access, or you have to forward them on maybe into an inbox that manages them, but Wellybox does that for you. So every time maybe you get an invoice from eBay, Amazon, if you've got like a Canva subscription, Adobe subscription, all of these types of things that are going into your inbox, Wellybox will automatically extract the document and it will link to your bookkeeping system like QuickBooks Sage Xero, and it will put the invoices into the bookkeeping system ready for processing.
Wow. So it literally is doing that on automation?
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
It's just constantly doing it. So,
yeah. So
how do you know so it's drops, so the receipts or the invoice in the inbox, how do you know it's been sent to the accounting system before you delete it out your inbox? Or
so you don't need to delete them out the inbox. Okay. So Wellybox will essentially manage those emails for you. It will see that you've had the email come into your inbox. It will file the attachment or file a copy of the email, whichever's needed. So it's got a copy of the receipt, and then it will file the email away. Fantastic. So you never even see it. And the reason why I put this in Profit Cash Growth Extras, because I was speaking to a potential client that I've been supporting over the last few weeks, and they were complaining that it's taking so much of their time. They've got a bookkeeper, but it's taking so much of their time dealing with the missing invoices and can I have a receipt for this and can I have a receipt for that? So I suggested Wellybox to them, but it's something that I've used before as well.
And that plugs into all accounting systems, or it's just
not all of them,
ones?
But certainly all the big ones it will integrate with. It's also got an app on your phone so you can scan receipts and invoices as you go along if you ever get physical copies as well. You can actually do it via WhatsApp as well, which I'm not quite sure why they've decided that's the way to go, but maybe it's because people are always in WhatsApp these days and it's quite easy. The best bit about it is it starts at $9 a month. So it's cheap as chips. You will easily get $9 a month worth of time savings out of this by just not having to manage, even if it just picks up 80% of your receipts that go into your inbox.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Claire. Well, did you know that 50% of the listeners of this podcast don't actually hit the follow button and subscribe to it? I know, it's shocking, isn't it? So I would say if you want to make sure that...
How do they know that we release a weekly one?
I would say to those 50% of people, make sure you've tapped that little follow button or the little download button or whatever on your podcast app to make sure that it auto downloads into your feed every week.
And don't forget to hit the like button or leave us a 5-star review, whatever platform it is that you're using. That would really, really help us just get this podcast out to other small businesses and help people to increase their profits, improve their cash flow and grow their business.
And did you know that 95% of listeners of this podcast have not yet left a review?
Wow.
Shocking, hey? So if you want to work with Claire in a business, profitcashgrowth.com, whiz over to the website. There you can get a free business review. And we'll see you again next week with more fascinating business interactions.